Hello, I'm Ollie, and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, horror, I'm doing a review of The MD by Thomas M Disch. So, Thomas M Disch is one of those authors I've kind of been aware of for a very long time, but never read. I did have a copy of his horror novel, The Businessman, when I was a teenager, but never got round to reading it. This one was published in 1991, and it's a really interesting book, but Dish is also a really interesting figure. So he was an extremely varied writer. So he wrote a ton of different stuff, which I didn't appreciate until I read up about a bit about him before doing this review. So as well as writing horror, which is what I knew him for, he'd also been a successful science fiction writer. He was involved in the theatre. He wrote poetry, and he was also involved in video game design. So he did a ton of different things. He was also someone, sadly, who suffered from mental health issues throughout his life, from quite an early age, I think, and ended up committing suicide after his life partner had died in 2005. So Dish was gay, and that is something that comes out in this book. There's some themes that I'll talk about. And yeah, so very sadly, he committed suicide in 2008, which is a shame because, well, I mean, it's awful whenever that happens to anybody. But, you know, he's, on the basis of this book, was an extremely talented writer. And I'm definitely interested in reading more by him. You can see from the little bibliography there in this edition, which was published in the 90s, there's a ton of different stuff already there, including children's books, plays, interactive software, short story collections, poetry, as well as novels. So, an interesting and very varied writer. So the MD is a fascinating book. It is, how long is it? Just over 500 pages. It's one of those books that I kind of went back and forth on whether it's too long or not. And I think, in the end, I don't think it is too long, because I think there doesn't feel like there's much waste in this book. He does a great job of making everything in it interesting and feel relevant. And it's told in quite a kind of classical novel style, in that it follows one character and what happens to them from childhood through to adulthood. And what it's about is this thing that you can see on the cover, which is a caduceus. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it's the classic kind of symbol of doctors, the cross with the snakes twined around it. And what happens in this book is the main character, as a child, finds this caduceus in like an attic, and it is a thing, a totem, if you like, with magical powers. And what that gives him the ability to do is basically, either heal people or harm people. And it follows, the title, the MD, gives away the ending, or the second half of the book, where he becomes a doctor as he grows up, and he uses this thing at various stages. As a child, he uses it to get revenge on people, but also to help people. And as an adult, he uses it in much grander ways, which will, which come out as the book progresses. So it's a really fascinating book. It's one of those books that kind of takes a very simple concept. So you could have, it could have been a short story, but there's a real richness to the writing and to the book that I think worked fantastically. And it really explores some very interesting ideas and concepts around what does it mean to heal people, and what's the correct how do the scales balance, I suppose. So in the book, in order to get the benefits, the healing benefits from the caduceus, it must also do harm. So there's a constant, it needs to be topped up, basically. So there's lots of points where he has to make decisions about whether or not it's the right thing to do to cause harm in order to then help someone else. There's a ton of stuff in here about the AIDS epidemic, particularly in the second half. So whilst there aren't, I don't think from memory there are any openly gay characters. It does touch on, the gay existence, which clearly in the early 90s and late 80s, when he was probably writing this, was, AIDS was a huge part of the public consciousness, and something that was, I'm sure, very much on the minds of gay men. So yeah, he does some really interesting things with this kind of magical concept and AIDS as an existential threat to humanity, and the way he deals with that is really, really interesting. So yeah, I thought it was a really fascinating book. It's definitely made me want to read more by him. And I will definitely do so at some point. I'm not sure if much of his stuff is still in print. I'll have to have a look. This I don't think was. I managed to get a second-hand copy of this, but he's definitely an author I'll be looking out for. So yes, a very, very interesting horror novel. I read it because it was. I'm doing a series of reviews of books that were nominated for the Stoker Awards, and it's not hard to see why this one was. It's a lot more thoughtful than many horror novels. The book I read for the previous year, so we're doing these reviews year by year, was Funland by Richard Lehman, which is one of the most thoughtless books I've ever read. So it was a pleasure to read something as thoughtful and interesting as this. So yes, a very interesting horror novel, definitely recommended. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well. Hope you are reading good stuff. Let me know if you've read any Thomas M Disch and what you think of him. And yeah, I will speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.